So it is day 117, ladies and gentlemen, and yeah, we're trying a little bit of a different layout for this one. You see, for those who don't know, I spent a great deal of yesterday renovating my room, which involved. I talked about having to move my bed hard up against the wall, just underneath the window. Actually, speaking of the window, I gave my the whole frame and the sill probably the most comprehensive cleaning of my entire life. And yeah, because I mean, to be fair, I've worked in commercial cleaning for just over 3 years, and to be fair, it is absolutely spotless. Because again, this is why again. Listen, there's always going to be cleaning work out there, and guess what? You're going to need someone who knows what he's doing and has a level of attention and care to make it look as nice as that. So I'm actually and by the way, there is still a few other things I do need to do because um outside of rearranging things like my computer and stuff like that, but there's still everything else still needs to have a little bit of a place, which involved yesterday throwing quite a lot of things away, donating things to charity, like clothes that I was never going to wear again anyway, and also just making more defined use of space. And making use of space is really up there in terms of just trying to get a room organized and sorted. And to be fair, since I had 2 days off work anyway, and I really couldn't put it off any other way, and I had nothing better to do in any case, there we are. That's the explanation for now. And to be fair, even though maybe if I had a tripod setup that went a little bit higher, like this, that so I can. That's okay. I think that's a little bit better. Yeah, I think that's good enough for now. But I also do like actually be able to have a table here and a table over there. So it means that when I'm not working, I can always turn around, write things. It's kind of like a mini study, and I do quite like the idea of having even a separate space in my room to have space to do other things. Because bear in mind, this whole room is, well, it is an entire space of my own. From it lets in the light, it allows me a place to sleep, it allows me a place to do work, to get dressed, to get undressed, to do a bit of exercise here and there, to look after and yeah, to get to place to put my clothes, a place to put up all my books and stuff like that. It's really satisfying, the notion that actually um I feel like I've done quite all right. And to be fair, almost all of this I've completely paid for myself. So yeah, the only other things I really don't think I've really had to fork out was one, the bed, the mattress, because I've had this for many years, and well, there are a few other little things here and there, but aside from that, it's pretty much bought and paid for. And whilst we're on the subject, being able to step away from work even for as short as 2 days, it's giving me a little bit of time to possibly just breathe out a little bit and possibly put my feet up a little bit, which is it kind of explains last night and how I was so tired and I really couldn't be form a proper sentence. It's because literally I was working in during the period where I probably should have been asleep, which is not great, I'll be honest, but oh well, that's just the sort of life I live nowadays. And also, yeah, I managed to dig out my Black Sabbath t-shirt for the first time in a couple of months. Don't know why I hadn't done it before. It's just I didn't really find the time for it. Anyway, so yeah, it seems as if I'm making sort of a little bit of the use out of things. But there are other things I wanted to be able to talk about because listen, when you have had a little bit of a break after a pretty busy period, it's surprising to know about what goes on in the rest of the world that you feel like you didn't really know what was happening, or the sort of thing that makes you go, hello, 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 what's going on here? And one example of this is apparently Trump now planning to invade Cuba. Right. So I understand. Listen, I understand. This is a whole story that goes back to the abduction of what was he called, President Maduro or something like that from Venezuela, and pretty much like all of the Latin speaking countries of South America, including Spain, pretty much all were like roaring with joy and as you do, um, praising Trump all the while. But whilst all that was going on, yeah, outside of Trump, also probably I don't know if it's just a means of like ceasing rebellions and stuff like that, or if there's any other method to all of this. Again, as to why this goes on, I'm not entirely sure because again, this is the problem when you've like been away from the news. Like it was the first real major news story I saw for the last 4 weeks. Was this about trying to invade Cuba? Because well, the thing about Trump trying to occupy Greenland hasn't exactly gone away yet. To be honest, why not just Trump go the whole hog and just occupy Denmark as well, so Greenland would have no choice. I'm not giving them ideas, but what exactly would stop them? What exactly would stop Trump from just, I don't know, deciding we'll occupy Poland or we'll occupy Belgium or Denmark or maybe Germany? It's a really big deal. I don't know what the answer to that is, and it's probably because, well, the UN would never allow it, I think. Speaking of not allowing, but would have to roll over anyway. There was another news story that I uncovered earlier today, and it talks about the government playing a risky game towards that we need like stronger welfare reform because they warn that they're going to start creating by the year 2030 what's referred to as the lost generation, and how they warn about 1 in 6 young people will be unemployed because job markets are, and this is something I do know because what I have heard over like the last month is that as a result of conflicts again in the Middle East, it's going to force nearly 200,000 construction workers, British workers, out of work. Claire's an accessory store has gone into receivership and is now having to close all of its stores, resulting in the loss of about 50,000 workers. And then, of course, LinkedIn has just they've had to relinquish nearly about 2,000 members of staff, whilst they are on board and cheering up and down about the use of artificial intelligence. If there's one thing that is going to be noticed is that jobs are being thrown left, right, and centre and to the four winds because, well, of stuff like that. Not necessarily because of progress, but because of things that progress can't really be blamed for, such as political revolutions. And anyone who knows anything about even the most rudimentary form of revolution knows that it causes collisions and afterwaves all across the world. You only need to look as far back as the French Revolution and the Red Terror and the Napoleonic Wars and the eventual consort of Europe to sort of see for yourself just the sort of effects that a revolution can have on a country. Or rather, the ones that seem to actually affect anything, it would seem. Because bear in mind, Sudan at this moment is still in the middle of its third and incredibly bloody civil war. And it's often referred to as the Forgotten War. Because during the siege, because listen, the third civil war in Sudan has been going on since roughly about the Hamas attacks in Israel. And insofar as I can understand, even at this stage, in the siege of Khartoum alone, which has lasted since the very beginning of the war, more human beings have died than the total war dead between the conflicts between Russia and the Ukraine and Hamas and Israel combined. They say that nearly 15% of its entire population has been dead. Somewhere about that is about nearly 7.5% of that just in Khartoum alone. apparently they said you could get sort of an accurate reading for how many people have died by literally satellite pictures, viewing at all the corpses literally lying in the streets. Khartoum apparently has been under some sort of like incredibly hostile siege, for which houses have been burnt in effigy, so there's literally nowhere to hide, or at least for documentation from the satellites in space. As far as we know, maybe the number is even higher, because of course, rebellion fightings are now like going off sort of to the north, where it borders with Eritrea, and then of course to the west, where it borders with the likes of Somalia. And then if you even go slightly further downwards, further south, you would also have the risk of trying to throw almost Chad and the Congo and the likes being thrown into the conflicts as well. And I could go on about, stories about like the militia and stuff like that. And well, the reason why, again, apparently all of this doesn't seem to affect anything geopolitically is for for two reasons mostly. The first is because of what I just said. Geopolitically, this forgotten war doesn't seem to affect anything in the West. And two, what on earth are we supposed to do about it anyway? Not because we can't do anything about it, but think about it this way. Sudan's system of government for the last 60 years, since right about the end of the Second World War, has been entirely based on a series of dictatorships overthrown by an extremist militia. The people rebel, war breaks out, and another militia takes its place. From what I understand, that's pretty much been Sudan's system for the last 80 years. And even if there was outside interference, it just means that, guess what? Wait another 20 years and another militia will take its place. Apparently, the militia that's trying to uphold things, take over things, are referred to as the devils on horseback. Lord knows what, the next one is going to take a look at. And also, what makes you wonder why exactly people would take a notice in from a almost religious aspect? Because insofar as I'm concerned or aware of, Islamic forces, I don't know whether or not they're related to Al Qaeda or in any way, but from what I understand is that for any Christian sects that inhibit parts of Sudan, because Africa does have I don't exactly know what the populace of Christian to Islam is like in across all of Africa, but apparently for what I understand, the militia are literally saying to Christians to either convert to their side or they would undergo inhumane torture. Kind of makes you wonder why again Christians don't rebel in this sort of manner, or whether or not that's for a more sinister reason. I have no idea. But to be honest, it's a distressing subject the more and more you think about it. So what exactly are we going to can be achieved from this? I have no idea. Anyway, the point of all this, before I got sidetracked, again, I just thought it was worth mentioning. Outside of conflicts abroad, which does actually throw foreign markets into disarray, there's also listen. I went through almost the whole of 2025 unemployed. I did manage to find work, 0-hour work and temporary work here and there, but it was in no way stable. And to be honest, there were stories that I heard and were continuing to hearing that, quite frankly, I just sort of thought, well, it's not so much that I was, it didn't make me want to be there, but also just because, well, the more you hear them, the more you sort of wonder, well, why am I even here then? There are some environments, I must admit, out there that are absolutely in no way fit or safe for people to be in, either physically or mentally. But I also will just have to admit, in a sort of a roundabout way, I'm not surprised. Because for all the jobs. And listen, I'm not going to go over the story about 2025 again from my perspective, from the amount of jobs I applied for that they said they get back in touch and never did, or go into details about, well, despite all that I did and all that I applied for, it still made no difference. And to be honest, I feel as if, like, guess what? It's not exactly going to be the end of it. I know absolutely the reasons why for this. Contempt. I know exactly why it is. There'll be places, offering work, and guess what? They won't ever really. You won't hear anybody actually filling a vacancy. And to be honest, from my experience, I know exactly the reasons why. It's because they don't exactly have the best reputation for their hiring policies, if it can even be described as legal. Then you run into a situation where, guess what? Despite people may be fully equipped and fully capable of actually being able to work, they may not get hired in the first place, or even get given the things they said they were going to be get. So I think there is, from my perspective, so there are so many companies in this country where their hiring policy is fraught with legal wranglings that you probably wouldn't even want an interview with these people if you were even so much given a chance. Um, there are some interviews I've sat in where I have been, well, absolutely exasperated by some of the things that people say. There's also times when I've been in work where I've been exasperated by people's behavior, and yet nothing is really done about it. And there's also been other times where there are just some environments that, quite frankly, no amount of training, no amount of preparation, no amount of we've seen and done all this before can actually uphold you from, some of the downfalls, which include, but are not limited to, you could do every single thing correct and they still look at you with disgusting eyes. Yeah, truth to be told, ladies and gentlemen, it's a contempt thing again, not just from the powers that be, but also from just the outside world. I'm not trying to suggest the idea that the outside world is a terrible, dark, gloomy, unhappy, and inhospitable place. What I am trying to argue, however, is that you can't expect people to be thrilled or satisfied because they've had to sell their wares and resort to wrangling with the last vestiges of their dignity just for a chance to survive. Because there are some things out there that are more important or valuable than money, such as one's dignity, self respect, and character generally. And there's nothing really people can do about that. So anyway, this whole story about, yes, 1 in 6 people in apparently 5 years' time between the ages of 18 to 30 will be out of work. Well, when you do hear of stuff like that, and when you actually, decide that, what, there are some things that the government can't be blamed for, if we're being honest. And yeah, you will have to accept that. You can't really look towards, just for someone else to blame. However, what I will state is that, well, what exactly is going to be done for it? Because, well, again, if they took like my history and my stories and stuff like that about what I've seen, I think it's the sort of thing that would be a little bit of an eye opener because, well, what explanation is there for saying that yes, somebody will be in touch with you and you never hear from them again? Especially when it's concerning a job I applied for. So you're gonna have to explain to me where exactly we start on things like that. Because, well, why do they not? Because, well, from the first point, why on earth are they lying to me about this? Like, do they want me to start lying to them? What a company to start working for when they can't be truthful with you. But why can't they be truthful? Do they feel like you don't deserve the truth? Is that what the point is? I don't 100% know what the reason is, but what explanation do you think people are going to draw to when you hear stuff like this? Meanwhile, there's also just this much to be said. When they refer to this as the lost generation, I can't help but feel as if maybe the powers that be or the people who write stuff like that may possibly need to think a little bit, twice when it comes to this. Because, for one, referring to as the lost generation would be almost tantalizingly close to referring to this as the quiet generation. Because I think it was the quiet generation in which this was sort of like a period from, it was either almost immediately before or immediately after the First World War, when there was seemingly a little bit of an issue in terms of guidance and where exactly people were going to go and what exactly there was to do. There was sort of a generation where not really any major events occurred and things were just sort of stable-ish for a while, which I understand the quiet generation was sort of like roundabout early 20th century, which again, trying to call that period quiet, even before, is a little bit of an interesting one. Or immediately after the First World War, when millions of soldiers, the ones who did come home, and there was almost no work and no real safe house to come home to. Yeah, it's not like that sort of thing, goes without notice. Or it might have been even before that entirely. The problem I want to raise with referring to this as the lost generation is, well, it's not just lost to people who are between the ages of 18 to 30, but in any case, you have to ask yourself the question of, well, and again, the whole thing about the lost generation is one that will need a very extensive video. In fact, there's probably even certain people I know I want to be able to like run a story with stuff like this. The first thing like people would argue is that, well, if people are, because you may have heard like certain things about, populations decreasing. Like Japan at this moment in time has something of a little bit of a population crisis with people living older and older, but there are fewer and fewer people actually being born. Sooner or later, that sort of thing is actually going to start catching up with people. Whether or not actually, happens in the West is something I'm not entirely certain about. But even if this whole lost generation was to come to being in about 22 years' time, I would say, so round about the time I'll be turning 50, there are things to mention is that, guess what? It's not exactly as if, all jobs will be going. There will be people who will be able to work somewhere in some capacity. And it's not exactly as if jobs will just cease to exist, because guess what? As much as, workers need work to be paid, companies need workers to be able to do their work. Otherwise, everyone would be going out of bust and nobody would inherit or have anything of at all whatsoever. There would be no home to go to, and there would be no work to drudge to either. So it will have to carry on in some capacity, and sectors will have to continue and adapt as time goes on, with the advancement of progress, artificial intelligence, all the rest of it. The other thing that people need to take in consideration, even by the time I get to 50, such questions are, well, if I'm in work anyway and I'm drawing a decent wage and I've actually got somewhere to come home to, and that my economy is doing, my personal finances are okay and stuff like that, what difference does it make if by such a time nearly 6 million people aged between the ages of 18 to 30 are in work or not? And of course, the other question, and maybe the more pertinent question to ask is, well, why exactly should we care what happens as long as, it doesn't affect us, because we're getting on with it just fine? The reasons are too numerous and almost too non-specific to go into details, because guess what? There are plenty of reasons to be careful and be interested. But then again, what about this whole thing about this whole lost generation? Because it isn't lost on me that, guess what? Work is not the only thing that can affect a generation. Attitudes towards some other things, for example, geopolitical events, war, sex, sport, um, forms of mass entertainment, even forms of religion do seem to have a bit of an impact every so often. I remember it was the beginning of last year, there was apparently a study where more and more people from the ages of 18 to 30 were actually starting to attend church. Probably, and that was actually a bit of a story for a while, that the surge of people going back to church was surprisingly high. And I think I could possibly hazard a guess as to reasons like this, outside of somebody making the conscious choice to go back. But there's also the conscious decision of, well, some people do need guidance when they feel as if there is nowhere else to turn to. And in the eyes of God, everybody is welcome in His house, and especially to people who are troubled and don't really know what to do or where to turn to. It's so whether or not this whole lost generation, as they put it, like manifests or becomes anything specific, or what it does affect, and even to take the option of sex, for example, or rather procreation. I've made it a point of mention that I have no intention whatsoever of having children, or even any sort of intention of getting married. I probably It's probably even likely I probably won't even have a girlfriend or a mistress or anything like that. However, putting all of that aside just for the moment, there's one or two other things to mention before we sort of close out. Um, is this the sort of thing that will start to affect people, or the sort of thing that won't become unnoticeable? Now, the reasons again people are put for not being able to like start families and stuff like that is because, well, the economy, that they can't actually afford to start a family if they wanted to, and things will continue to spiral in prices all the while. So if you think it's hard now, in several years' time, it will become very, very difficult for some people. Though, with that being said, even people living on welfare, it has at no point, even when the welfare state was established, did it ever discourage people from getting married. And that is also probably a thing worth coming back to. The institution of holy matrimony is one that is not financially dependent. It's the sort of thing that does play on people's minds every so often, but at the same time, you can be poor, but you can still be happy. And I think it's the sort of thing that when you put it into cases like that, you begin to ask the question about, well, again, what difference does it make to some people whether they're in work or not, or this whole lost generation is an impending disaster that probably won't affect me in my lifetime, but it will affect people 60 years down the line, probably long after I'm dead. But is it the sort of thing that, well, do we keep an eye on? Because guess what? Logically, if you think the lost generation, as they put it, what about what happens to the next generation, the despair generation, as far as we're concerned? One in which all the robots and all the AI take over every single job there is possible to do, where nobody has any work, nobody has anything to call their own, nobody is actually able to actually make any sort of money whatsoever outside of doing things that are morally grey at best and downright insidious at worst. And for that matter, well, what happens after the generation after that? Maybe that's the sort of reason why we should care about what happens after we are long gone. But that hasn't happened yet, and we have no idea what it will look like. Even if I live for another 100 years, we probably might never know. With that being said, however, that's just the sort of thing that happens when you decide to take a look at the news for the first time in a month. I should probably just stick to looking at the sports news. At least that's slightly different. because that's happening all the time as well, but it's slightly less depressing. You know, I remember when I was working in a place where I would watch like the sports news when it was just sort of like on in the background, Sky Sports News for reference, and one of the adverts they ran almost all the time between breaks was Newman.com. You know, short, shy, well, do something about erectile dysfunction at Newman.com. And I have pretty much long joked since that, listen, if you were literally watching Sky Sports News all the time, forget Newman, you were never getting it up ever again. Because that's literally the target demographic, is people who watch Sky Sports News, aka people who literally can't get an erection. Sad but true. But what do you expect when you have to see that every single time? Meanwhile, that is gonna do it for now. And yeah, I think I put a little bit more gusto into today's video than most, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. And let me know if you think I'm wrong in my assumptions or in my beliefs, because again, by the end of July, I would have been making videos on the internet for 8 years. I've witnessed wars breaking out, pandemics running amok, revolutions kicking off, and we could be seeing more invasions and more wars and more plagues than you could wave a God stick at. Yeah, do you think God is mad at us for some reason? Maybe you heard that. God, if you just had enough, just let us know and we'll take the hint. And I'll see all of you guys again next time. Thank you.